So I know last night was open hack, so we will use the first couple minutes of class to dive into any insights from open hack, anyone that you met, any insights from there, any thoughts in general, or going back into Monday's class, thinking about the day 2 of the blog, anything interesting that you learned there, anything that you're still struggling with, any key concepts that you found helpful or that are just not clicking. How are we feeling on this lovely Wednesday of a hump day?
It was nice seeing everybody's projects, getting to kind of see what everyone was working on so far.
Absolutely. Yep. And a reminder that this upcoming capstone check-in, which isn't until about a little under a month from now, right? Early July. I think it's right when we come back from the 4th of July break. There's no requirement for JavaScript in that capstone check-in, right? So we're still learning JavaScript. We're not anticipating that you apply it directly into your projects. And we also don't anticipate you having any APIs integrated at that capstone check-in either, mainly because we haven't learned how to build them, let alone use them yet, right? So this next capstone check-in is saying, hey, let's go back to that HTML and CSS, all the way back to week 2 through what, 5, and start saying, all right, I've got my wireframes, I've got all of this project planned out. Now I got to apply it. Now I got to dive into actually using it, building out those pages, thinking about the grid layout, thinking about all of that. Joe, good question. How many HTML pages should we have completed? The answer is the majority of them. Whether you want to interpret the majority as 51% or 99% is up to you. Some people's projects will only have a couple pages in them, right? But the pages that they have are really complex. And then other people's projects will have a lot of different pages that may be a little bit simpler, or you may be one of the unlucky few that have a buttload of pages to make that are all complex, right? Um, so that's why we kind of give you that wiggle room. Basically, what we want to see at the next capstone check-in is without your wireframes, we can understand the majority of your application. We can say as a user, hey, there may be a page or two missing, but in general, if I looked at this HTML, I could tell you what this web app was used for without actually having any explanation. So that's kind of the benchmark that you want to shoot for, at least 2 or 3 pages. But in general, we want to be able to say, hey, the majority of this front end is now built. It doesn't need to be interactive. It doesn't need to be pulling in any real data. It doesn't need, in fact, you should be using dummy data, right? And actually, ChatGPT is really good at that. If you build out 2 examples and you say, hey, here's the HTML for 2 things with some data loaded into them, generate 10 more of them for me, it will actually generate out HTML for you with people's names in it or different song titles or different descriptions or whatever it is. So you can lean into ChatGPT for that. You don't need to go overboard either. We just want to see 2 or 3 examples of how this lays out, how you see different data. And then, of course, the real data will either be coming from a third-party API, i.e. an API someone else built, or it will be coming from the API that you guys will be learning to build in the second half of the program, which will all be powered from a database. Other questions? I believe the plan is for some of you to meet at Common Space around noon or 1 p.m. I will show up on Saturday around 1. We'll do office hours then. I'll have the Zoom room open, and then I will let you guys get onto your capstone projects and we'll get out of your hair. Use this opportunity as a break in the homework to make sure that you are focusing on your capstone. You do not want to get to the 4th of July and be celebrating the holiday and then go, oh crap, there's a capstone check-in when we get back. Uh, So keep that in mind. Any other questions about where we're headed, the blog project? The plan is to do the JavaScript self-assessment tomorrow in class, where I go over a list of concepts. We use that as a review point. That is helpful not only to me to know what kind of concepts we should be touching on or trying to integrate into the projects, but it can also be helpful for you. To also dive into, hey, it turns out that I don't get this concept as much as I thought. I need to go use that resource list, whether it's Odin Project or Free Code Camp or finding YouTube videos or anything along those sorts to start diving into that. Oftentimes you feel just overwhelmed with JavaScript and you're like, I don't feel like I'm quite getting it to the level that I should, but I also am so intimidated by that overwhelming anxiety feeling. I don't know where to turn to get more help, right? And so the goal of tomorrow's class will be going through that self-assessment, breaking it down, and either aiming for the goal of, oh, it turns out I do get these concepts a little bit more than I thought I did, or, hey, here are the couple concepts that I'm still struggling with. That's where I really need to focus it. So important to remember that we don't go from 0 to 100 in JavaScript, right? And when we're doing projects, it may seem like that, but when you break it down into the concepts of, hey, what am I struggling with? Is it syntax? Is it functions? Is it loops? Is it the document object model? Is it variables? Is it data types and structures? Is it, right? All of that stuff we're going to dive into tomorrow. And we'll also have a dash of DevOps in there, and HTML as well. So hopefully that will break down that intimidation factor of all of JavaScript coming at you all at once. We'll break that down. But we do have another day of the blog project. Today, we're going to talk about CRUD, create, read, update, delete. We're going to talk about and build out a login system so only logged in users can create new posts. Won't be the most secure method, but at least you'll get to see a login page built out with HTML, with CSS, with submitting a form, all of that good stuff. Um, and I feel like there may be one more thing that we need to dive into on the blog, but we'll figure out when we get there. Any questions, any comments, any concerns, anything that we should touch on before we start the review of the existing blog before we get into new features?
And OpenHack, I definitely learned a few things. Especially with I think it was what was it called? The Express,
Mhm.
the job thing. Yeah, I learned a little bit about what they're looking for and stuff. And when I was talking to somebody, they also recommend me like a resource. What was it called? I think it's called Mimo. Mimo is like it kind of reminds me of like Duolingo, except it's for like programming languages. I was like actually I was working on like the JavaScript like section of it. And I thought it was like pretty cool to do on like on my phone and stuff. So
Cool. Share a link to that in the chat, just in case other students find it helpful. There's the whole realm of gamification, right? And anything that it takes to get those concepts in. There You may be mentioning one that I know a former student used and really liked, but that idea of breaking down learning these concepts into little, 5-10 minute interactive snippets to challenge yourself can be a great way to learn all of that. Anything else that we should talk about before we dive into our review of the blog? Okay. Let's dive on in. I'm going to get started by copying my files over so we're all in the right spot, and then we will do a review of everything. I'm headed into my week 9 folder. I am going to duplicate my day 1 folder and rename it to day 3 because day 2 was open hack, so we skipped that. I am going to pop open day 3 into VS Code. I will drop a live share link in the chat. guys situated here so I can see the chat. Whenever I unplug my laptop, it makes me reorder all my windows around. Okay. I will go live here. Okay, so quick review of where we left off, right? So this is the first time that we're seeing local storage, right? This is the first project we're using local storage, and local storage is not something that we use a ton because oftentimes we want to store that information in a way that a lot of users can access it, right? So local storage is the concept in the same realm of a database. And so we'll be learning Postgres, which is a SQL database. You may have heard of SQL or pronounced SQL. Either one is acceptable. SQL is a way that we can store information on the server so that we can connect it to an API so that we can share that information across different front ends, right? Problem is that that's a lot to learn to get up to that spot. So what we used instead is a more basic storage mechanism called local storage. Local storage can only store key values just like objects can. The difference is an object in JavaScript can store all kinds of data types, right? It can store numbers, it can store Booleans, true or false, it can store strings, it can store other objects, and it can store arrays. And of course, you can always nest an object in an object, or an array in an object, or an object in an array. Local storage can't do any of that. Local storage says, listen, you give me a key, which is a string, you give me a value that is a string, and that is all that I can remember. So we first saw the joys of this on Monday when we had to start working with what we call parsing and stringifying, basically converting a string to an object or an array, and an object or an object or an array to a string. And that is all, again, because local storage cannot store a complex data type. So we're going to flow through this visually, and then I promise at the end of the night, when we get to the end of the project, we will go back through and number all of these things out. So where did we leave off? We left off on the home page, right? And we started with this placeholder text here. This placeholder, we build out in HTML first, so it makes it easier for us to integrate it into our JavaScript. So we build out this HTML and get all of the styling right. We've got the card coming in from Bootstrap. We put them in a column, so we get this layout going across. We come down all the way to our JavaScript, and the HTML is like, all right, I created a link for a new post. I put this example content in. Here is this script.js. But before we flow through the script.js, we want to figure out, how does a new post get created first? So I'm going to pop open my script.js. And I'm also going to pop open my new post.html and my new post.js. So new post.html has basically just a form. And it says, when this form gets submitted, go reach into the JavaScript and create a post. But before that happens, we build out the form itself. So we put these inputs here and we put IDs on each one of them. Those IDs are what is making it easier in our JavaScript to reach in and pull the values outside of it. We also put in a button down here at the bottom with a type of submit. That means when the enter button is pressed or the button is clicked to submit the form, we go and create the post using our JavaScript. So this create post here lines up with this create post right here. Interrupt me at any time for questions, but I'm going to pause there. Does anyone have questions so far?
I do have a question.
Shoot.
It's about something all the way in the beginning. Just
Yeah.
a clarification in your
Yeah.
with the Bootstrap cards. You said you got them to be beside themselves because you put them in a column
Yep.
right there. Like the whole container for the cards, like all the cards in one column.
Each card has its own column.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
So we do a col here, And then we say, what do we want to be in that call? We want the whole card to be in it. Then we close out the call and make a whole new column for each card.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions so far? Okay. So what do we do when we finally hit that create post button? This JavaScript just hangs out. It logs out JS linked. It comes all the way down here and goes, okay, I'm going to take all of this create post stuff and I'm just going to remember that that function is a name, but I'm not going to do anything when the page first loads. Remember, functions only ever run when we call or execute that function by saying create post and putting parentheses in, or when a JavaScript event runs, like this on submit. So this on submit runs and it goes, okay, create post. What do you want me to do? Don't refresh the page, which is the default behavior of the form. Now come down here and grab access to the form through the event target. The event target, the event itself was the submission. The target is the submission of what? The form. So we store that in form. Now we do something a little different that we haven't seen before. We go into local storage and we get an item called posts. Why do we need to do this? Because later on in the page, we need to say, hey, if this is the first post, then we need to basically create an empty list to store all of those posts in. If it is not the first post, what do we want to do? We don't want to override all the other posts. We want to take this post and add it on to the end of the list of all the other posts. So that's what we do here. We pull out the posts, but when we're in local storage, when we pull those posts out, it is always coming out as a string. So we don't really need to name this as string, but it is good to be descriptive so we don't accidentally pull out those posts thinking that they're coming out as an array before we parse them out. So we go into local storage, we get our item out called posts. Then we come in here and we say, if there are not, that exclamation point is saying, if there are not old posts as a string, make posts equal to an empty array. Now we need to declare the variable let posts outside of this if else statement block, because if we don't, we won't be able to access that variable outside of the block of the if or the else statement. What do I mean by a block? Anything that is in curly braces is a block of code. A block of code has its own scope. What does scope mean? It means I can't access that outside of those curly braces unless I declare it outside of the curly braces. So you can always reach scope outside of the block, but if a variable is declared inside the block, it is declared in that scope, meaning we can't access it outside. Pausing there for questions. Okay, so we say if there are not any old posts in there, we take an empty array, we store it into posts. Now that we have that empty array, we can add things to it down the road. It would be kind of like saying, okay, make a list. I need this thing, and this thing, and you're still searching around for the piece of paper, and you're like, well, I can't remember those 3 things unless I have a place to write them down first. That's what we're doing right here. We're saying, hey, make this empty thing, and if there's nothing in storage already, make that thing an empty list. Grab an empty sheet of paper to put those things on. But if it is not empty, that must mean that there's already a list going on. The problem is that list going on is a string, and we're like, we don't want it as a string. We can't add to the end of a string easily. So instead, what we do is we take what is already in the memory, what is coming out of local storage, and we parse it. What is parsing? Parsing is the opposite of stringifying. It's saying take something that is a string and using JavaScript object notation, JSON, parse the string out into an object or an array that we can work with. So we store that in posts instead. Now, no matter if the if statement ran or the else statement ran, we know we have an array to work with because we either pulled the array out of storage and all of the data in the array, the list of all of the posts, or we just started it as an empty array. Any questions? Okay, now we work on, well, what do we want to store in that array? We want to store an object because all of that data is related, and we want to be able to access all of that data using these keys. So we set up 4 keys: title, title, content, author, and timestamp. And then we say, what do we want to store in them? We want to store the form, elements, and then we use the IDs that all line up with this form right here. Basically go into the form, pull out the particular elements IDs that we're looking for, and we don't need the whole input. What we care about is the value. We care about what got typed into it. So we create this big object here, and then we take the posts that we figured out if it's an empty array or a list of all the existing posts, and we push. What does push do? It adds on to the end of the array, and we push in the post, which is going to be this big object right here. Finally, we now need to reverse the parse because posts is an array. It's a list of all the different posts, and it may only have one post in it at this point, or it could have all of the posts that we've created up until now. So no matter what's in it, we take that array of posts and we stringify it. We convert the array to a string. We store that in posts as string. We then take posts as string and store that into local storage by setting the item of posts. Finally, we redirect to the home page. Questions so far?
With the Windows location, I remember you said we could change it to like anything, right? We could write instead of like a slash, we just write like index.html. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, you can redirect to any page name here, but when we redirect to a slash, we're saying redirect to the root of the home page, or basically redirect to the home page as if there were nothing else left in the URL. You can technically actually redirect to an entirely different website here if you wanted to, and that would also work. Any other questions? Okay, we redirect to the home page. So that means we go to index.html. Index.html does the same exact thing. It builds out all of this placeholder content. It goes, okay, bootstrap again, cards, card text, card title. I know how to do all of that stuff. Now I need to go back into my script.js and read that. Script.js goes back into local storage, and instead of setting an item, it gets an item. The item that it gets is posts. That lines up with the posts that we just set in when we created a new one. So we come in here and we say, okay, go get the post as a string and parse out the posts. Then set up some variables. First, console log out the posts so we can debug what information is coming out of this. Then make a new string called generated HTML, and then go in and check to see if there are not posts as a string. When would there not be posts as a string? Well, when this page first loads, before we create any blog posts, there may be no posts created. So we handle that right here. We say, if there are not any posts as a string coming from our local storage, put in our generated HTML, hey, no posts exist yet. However, if there are posts as a string, what we can do is we can sort them. This is sorting so that the earliest timestamps come up before any of the later timestamps. Basically, put our newer posts first. Then once we sort them, loop over them. Give me every individual post singular, of the plural posts. Loop over the array. What do we want to do with that array? We want to generate out a column for each one of the posts. That column has a card in it, and it's got a card body in it. It's got a card title in it. And then we go, hey, template literal. $ curly braces is basically saying concatenate in, add a value from the post. Where is the post coming from? The post is coming from, and I'm going to try and scroll up and do this all visually so we can see the connection of the data. We go local storage, get the posts, store that in post as string. Take post as string, parse it, and store it in posts. Then take those posts, sort them out, and store them back in posts now as sorted. Then take those posts, loop over them, give me access to each individual post, then take that individual post and extract out the title. Also use that post to get out the author, and also use that post to get out the content. Then we take this entire thing and dump it into the p tag or the div class author or the h5 card type right here. Any questions about any of that?
Yeah, I do have a question. So when we sort the posts,
Yep.
in that else loop, we must like save it, resave it as a variable, like it won't just auto update.
Correct. So it depends on how the function is written, right? So just like JSON parse up here, the output of the function is what we want to store, what we want to operate on. What is an example of where we don't need to store it? Well, if we look, we just do post.push post. Why don't we say posts equals post.push post? Because it depends on the way the function is written. The function will either modify what we're calling it on, or it will return a new value. Well, how do we know that? We can actually look. So if we say posts in, if we say array push MDN, you will see it says the push method of the array instances adds the specified values to the end of the array and returns the new length of the array. Well, we don't care about the new length of the array. We care that we added the item onto the array. And so that's exactly what it's showing here, right? We've got pigs, goats, and sheep. And if we add cows on by pushing it to the array, take the output of the array, we actually get the count. That is because .push is modifying the original array compared to something like .sort. It will say the sort method sorts the array in place. In other words, it's modifying what we call it on and returns the reference to the same array now sorted. So .sort is not modifying the original array. We've got to take that and use that value. So it depends on what method we're using. A method like JSON.parse, which we use up here, is not modifying the original variable. It is not converting posts as strings in place. Instead, it is doing the conversion and returning it to us as a new variable. So it just depends on what method you're using. And the only way to know that is to go to the documentation and say, hey, are you modifying the original or are you returning a new value out to me? In general, it's considered best practice to return out a new value so you don't accidentally modify the original. But in the case of .push, you're like, well, I'm just adding a value to the array. That's literally the whole point of .push is add something onto the original array. And so that's why in the case of dot push here, we don't have to set it equal to a new variable. Good question. Any other questions? Okay, so we generate out all of this HTML. This is not going to be one div class call that gets generated unless there's only one post. This HTML keeps on adding to itself. It keeps on adding another div, another div, another div for each one of the posts that exists. So we're not just generating out one div, we're generating out that giant div every time the loop runs and sees a new post. Finally, we dive down here, we take our generated HTML and we shove it into the element with the ID of posts that is lining up right here. And what are we putting inside the inner HTML of it? We're putting in the HTML that we generated. That means that it is overwriting all of the call cards in here. It's getting rid of all of those, and instead what it is putting in is the content of the template literal that we generated from the for loop that we got from parsing the parsing the posts as a string that got set in from our new post form that was stringified using JSON, using the document object models inputs values. Say that 3 times fast. Okay, that's what we've done so far. I remembered the feature that we forgot to build, which is this read more feature. So that's where we're going to start tonight. Does anyone have questions? Hopefully just a review. But again, if we're feeling lost now, we're not going to feel good about adding on to this day 3, let alone day 2, let alone day 1. So this is your opportunity now. If there's any part of this where you're like, I don't get this. No question is too dumb. No question is too smart. No question is off the table at this point. This can be an, hey, I don't get this line of code. It could be, I don't know how I was supposed to know to write that line of code. Anything up until this point, any questions so far? Yes, Michael.
All right, so mine doesn't reverse the order. Of course, now I took the code out of it, but when I tried to literally just copy, or not copy paste, but I guess just slavishly copy your code, it just took me back to the home page, sort of the original sort of anonymous 3 posts.
Okay, share your screen and pop open your console and we will dive in.
Oh, that's right.
And Asma, I just saw your question in the chat. I will answer that next. Sorry, I did not have my chat scrolled down. Okay, so no error messages. So where did you try and put in your sort?
Right here.
Okay, so we should be able to, if you give me a remote, before we run through the loop, we want to say, hey, if there aren't any posts, we can't sort anything, right? So what we want to do is before we loop through all of them, we want to sort them. So we're going to put that right here, and we're going to say posts is equal to our post sort. Our sort gives us access to 2 items, and we want to sort by saying b dot timestamp minus a dot timestamp. Okay, so it broke, which is exactly what you said it did. And it says type error attempted to assign to read-only property. What do you think that's trying to tell you?
I'm trying to change a constant.
You sure are. What are we trying to change? Posts. Where did we declare posts? We declared it up here. So all we need to do is make that a let, and you're back in business.
Oh, all right. Thank you very much.
Of course. Okay, 2 other questions that just popped in. And if anyone else needs help getting their code caught up, I'm gonna open the chat. Okay. Why do we stringify the array? We stringify the array on newPost.js right here. Well, what if we didn't do that? What if, and don't follow me on this, just showing an example, we just took our posts and we saved that into local storage? Well, if we take a look, what is saved in right now from the previous code, it looks like it is an array of objects, right? This is actually JavaScript object notation because it is a string that we generated, we stringified using using the array. So if I write a new post and say A, B, C, and create that in, our local storage is like object, 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 object. And I'm like, well, where did all my data go? The problem is local storage does not know how to store anything other than a string. We can kind of hack our way into that by using JavaScript object notation to convert our array into a string. And then when we pull the data out of local storage, we can parse that string to turn it back into an array or an object. So the reason why we need to stringify right here is because local storage cannot store objects or arrays itself. So we need to use JavaScript object notation to convert it into a string when we put it in. And then again, on our script.js, take that string out and parse it to convert the string back to an object or an array. So it doesn't necessarily make the code easier. It's getting around a limitation of local storage, just like a limitation of a lot of the internet, that the internet can't transmit arrays or objects or any complex data structure. So instead, we convert it to a string on one side, and then we unconvert it. We take it from a string back to an object or an array when we pull that data out. Any questions on that? Okay. Why do we put the exclamation on line 15 of new post? This exclamation point says not. So it is basically saying take whatever the value of this is and convert it to whatever it is not. So we are saying if there is not posts as a string, we basically say if there isn't anything in local storage, but the exclamation point is saying take whatever the value is of this and reverse it. So if whatever is here is true, make it false. And if whatever is here is false, make it true. The other way that we could write this is we could actually flip this. We could say if there are posts as a string, go do all of this work here. Else, go do this right here. So oftentimes we want to put our simplest if case first. And so it is easier to say if there are not posts as a string, go do this one line. Otherwise, go do all of this work if there are posts as a string. So you can think of the exclamation point as saying reverse whatever is here. If there are posts of a string, make it so there are not posts as a string. It's basically flipping the true to the false or the false to the true. Joe.
You mentioned having the smaller case in front. Is that just a typical convention?
Typical
like,
convention,
readability?
just because it's easier to read that and go, oh, this is just one line of code. If you have if both of them have 20 lines of code and the other one has 30 lines of code, no one's going to be like, oh, you put the bigger one on top, right? But when it's a really simple case, when it's just throw this error message or do this one simple thing, handle basically the edge case first and then go do the big block of code next.
Gotcha.
I don't know that you would ever find that written out in a style guide, but it's a personal preference for me because otherwise your brain is going through all of this code here first, right? And you get all the way down here, and then you have a little tiny else case down at the bottom, and you're like, what was that if, what is that else off of, right? Like, and you got to scroll all the way up to the top and remember what the case is. So just personal preference. Computer doesn't care, but someone else reading your code might. Other questions? Let's take a quick break now to do attendance. The secret word tonight will be get param. G-E-T space P-A-R-A-M. We're going to learn about get parameters for the first time tonight. Get param, you got it right in the chat, Joe. Param is short for parameter. We're going to learn how we can store some information in the URL to extract that out somewhere else. One second, and then we will dive in. Okay. So we would like to make it so when we click on this read more button, we would like it to take us to a new page that has only the details of this one particular post. The problem is that we don't want to create 3 separate pages. Let me make a post first. My first post. Did I break my JavaScript? I sure did. 1 second. Second post. Okay. So we got our posts in. We want to make it so when we click this read more button, it takes us to a page that shows us only that one blog post in particular, right? But we have some dynamic content going on here, right? So far, our write posts is just one form. It shows the same form every time, just takes the data, shoves it in local storage. Our homepage, however, is dynamic. What do we mean by dynamic? It's generating the HTML based off of what we have in local storage, right? So it is going to change based off of whatever someone types in the form and hits the save button. Well, we want to also make a dynamic read more page that is going to go into local storage and pull out just the posts that we care about, and then it will put that on the page. So I'm going to close out of everything except index.html and script.js. I'm going to make a new page called read.html. That is the page that is going to read the details of a particular post. I'm going to exclamation point enter. I will say Max's blog as the title. I am going to go to my index.html and go borrow my link tag for Bootstrap. I'm going to go back to my read.html and go ahead and paste that link tag in. I am also going to head to my body and add in a script tag to read.js. And finally, I'm going to make my read.js with a console.log.js linked. Okay, now we want to think like engineers. We've got a lot that we've got to break down here. So we're going to just brainstorm a list. You will do this in a Google Doc. Anywhere that you want to jot down notes is totally fine. But we want to think about this because oftentimes when we're getting started on our capstone, we look at the entire wireframe and we're like, where do we start, right? And so thinking like an engineer, we want to break this down into steps. So first step, make index.html link to the read page. Then make read page access local storage, parse the data from local storage. And what problem are we going to run into? Well, the whole point of the read page is to show one post, right? When we pull out all of the posts from local storage, we're going to get a list of all the different posts. So what we need to do is say filter or filter/find the one post that we care about, generate the HTML to include the content from the post, and finally make the HTML show up in the page. Anyone have questions about that breakdown process of, hey, we're about to write a whole bunch of new code here, but this is how I think about the engineering of all of this, right? This is how I'm thinking, all right, how do I break this down into small enough steps? I'll paste this in the chat so you guys have a copy of it as well. We may not know how to do each one of these steps, but if we're thinking about this as a whole, we can't go to ChatGPT and go, I need a page that shows an individual post. Go write that for me, right? It's going to be like, oh, you local storage, you making an API call, this static content, where's all of this coming from, right? But if we think about breaking these down into individual steps, I can think about, oh, make index.html link, that's going to be an A tag. So that's where we're going to start. So our index.html is linking not this content right here. Where is this actual read more button actually getting generated? It's actually hiding out in our script.js because this is what's actually generating out the HTML that we get to see. So we already have a read more. We already have an A tag around that. So all we need to do is say, hey, read.html is where that read more button is going to take you. So we add in again in our script.js, not in our HTML, because our script.js is what's generating the HTML that overrides the original HTML. We throw in our read.html here. We go over to our homepage, we click read more, and it takes us to our blank read page. Again, that is in the ahref that is around the read more button. Now we go back to our list here, and it says make read page access local storage. Okay, well, where did we access local storage before? We accessed local storage in our script.js. We say window local storage get item posts. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go to our read.js and we're going to say const post as posts as string equals window local storage get item posts. Okay. now that we have those posts, what was number 3? Parse the data from local storage. Why do we need to parse it? Because if we console log the posts as string, initially, it looks like we're getting all of the data that we want. But if we throw a type of in front of that, we are reminded that it is a string. That means that if I try to do something like post as string and push in some item, it's going to error out and it's going to say, hey, push doesn't exist on a string. Well, of course it doesn't. What are we trying to do? We're trying to push onto an array. We're trying to add to the end of a list. So we need to parse that out. So what we're going to do is we're going to say const posts equals JSON.parse posts. Okay, now we have an array. So if you think trying to pause a live Zoom meeting is a problem, you should see me trying to put WWDC live event in 2x. Oh, Tiffany, you caught an error. Thank you. This should be posts as string, not posts. My bad. Thank you. Okay, now that we have our posts, we're going back over to our to-do list so far, and we're saying, all right, parse the data from local storage. Great, we've done all of that. Now we are making progress on something that initially was like, I don't even know where to get started, because we listed it out in English just as individual sentences. Now all of a sudden this becomes much easier to code. So now we have to filter all of the posts or find just that one post that we care about. Well, if we do a search for JS array find one item, the first thing that comes up is a very aptly named function called find. And if we look at the example of this code, it is saying, hey, here's some array. So we say the name of the array dot find, and then we have to do some if statement here. We're saying find some element if the element is greater than 10. Well, what's the first thing it does? It loops through this and it goes 5 is not greater than 10. We don't care about that element. 12 is greater than 10. So we are going to take whatever the first element that we find that is true based off of this condition, and we're going to store it in found. This is different than .filter. .filter would return an array of 12, 130, and 44. .find is slightly different because it's going to only match on the first item that it finds and return that item back out. So why do we care about all of this? Because if we console log our posts and then take a look, we have 2 different posts in here, but I only want the content of one post to show. So I'm going to say, hey, my const post, singular, is going to go to our posts, plural, and find a individual post where, where what? Well, we run into a problem there because I'm looking at this and I'm like, well, what posts do we want?
Do we use like the index with the brackets?
We could, but then it's like, what are we trying to make that equal to? What are we trying to filter that on? Tiffany, where do we get post.id from? Joe, you're on the right track there. We need to somehow say, hey, the post that we're trying to get is the post that we click the read more button on, right? So take it back to a user experience level. We can't solve that right here alone. We don't know what read more button they clicked on, But if we think about it from the user experience perspective we do know what posts we do know, hey, the post that should show up on this page is whatever post they hit the read more button on. So we do need to find some way to take the data here and send it into the other page.
Like a on click.
We could on the on click, but we already have the href that is doing that that work for us. So one way we could do this is we could use local storage again. On the home page, we could say local storage set item to the read more clicked and set the read more clicked equal to something that we could pull out to get that post on the page. However, there is something else that we use here when it's just one tiny little piece of data that we want to send in. What we are going to use is called a get parameter. A get parameter is anytime you see in the URL, there's a question mark, and then it looks like there are key value pairs. That's exactly what we're going to use. We're going to go to our script.js, and if we look at the data that we have access to, we have the author, content, timestamp, and title. Well, it is entirely possible that I create another blog post that has the exact same title. So that's not going to be the best one to use. We could use the array index, but what happens if we delete a post? Now all of a sudden the URL is going to change for all of the posts in the list because a post got removed. But chances are I'm not going to have a blog post that was created at that exact same timestamp down to the millisecond, right? So that's what we're going to use as our ID. Normally, databases generate an ID, and we would use that in the URL. But we don't have a database right now, right? We just have this array of all of the posts. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to this read.html, and we're going to add a question mark. The question mark, every browser knows, hey, this isn't actually going to take you to a different page. This is just some data that is getting passed around. And we're going to say timestamp is equal to a template literal that is going to use the post's timestamp. Now that we have that post, that timestamp in there, we're going to go back to our home page. And now if we click the read more button, look what's hanging out in the URL up here. A timestamp. And if we go back and look at this other URL, you will notice that timestamp is slightly different. Well, we can extract that information out in our JavaScript. So we're going to head back over to our read.js. We're going to comment out our find for right now because it's not fully complete. It's going to give us syntax errors. So I comment that out. And now I'm going to say, hey, the params are going to come from this thing called URL. URL is built into JavaScript just like date is built into. And we're going to give the URL based off of the window location href. We've seen window.location before to redirect. We can also use window.location to get out the details of the current href, the current hypertext reference that we are on. Then we can say, hey, the date ID is going to come from the params that we just created here. And we're going to use the search params, another name for the get parameters, and we're going to pull out the timestamp. And then we are going to console log out the date ID. I want to make it clear, this is not the only way to do this, right? We totally could have used an on-click on the home page that used local storage to set whatever ID that we wanted. Then we could have gone back in on read.js and pulled that out of local storage. However, it is often common to use a search param or a get param, that kind of mean the same thing, to store information, especially if it's a tiny piece of information, to pass it from one page to another. We'll be doing this in your capstones. If you have any things where you have a list of all of the data, and then when you click on that item, you want to get more details about that one particular item, we'll be using either what we call a route param or a get param or a search param to pass the data from one page to another. Now, if we console log out our date ID, we can see that, oh, sorry, .search params .get. I missed a .get in there, my bad. Now, if we come over here, we should see this time in the URL or in the console. I'm going to pause there. Does anyone not have a time in the URL? Actually, I'm going to poll so make sure everyone has time to catch up here. Poll launched in Zoom. And again, we're looking for on our read page, we should see a number come out. Number will not be the same exact one as mine. That is okay. But if you are seeing null or undefined or an error at this point, you need to do a little debugging or ask for help. Don't forget, we did make a modification to this script.js to put this timestamp in here, right here. Don't forget the question mark so the browser knows, hey, there are some params that we're sending in here. The timestamp is the name of the key. So just like objects or local storage, params have a key and a value. The equal is saying, hey, I'm going to pass you the value now. The $ curly brace is saying I want to drop a value into this string. The value that we're dropping in is the post timestamp. When we click on that read more button, it is going to show us the timestamp up in the URL. That means that when we get over to our read.js, we can use the URL params to reach into the search params, because there are other types of params, and get out the timestamp. Then when we log out that date ID, we can see that number, which is coming from the timestamp up here. A couple of you have not voted in yet, so I will give you another minute to work on that.
My read more button's not working.
All right. Share your screen. The get param, yes, just passes data from one page to another using the URL. Okay, so let's start with your script.js because that's what's putting the timestamp in. And you do have your question mark timestamp equals post.timestamp. So that looks right. So then we're going to go over to our read.js. And you are passing in, so after params.search params, I missed a part in my code. between the parameters and the word search params, we need a .get after the word search params. Yeah. Save that, see if that fixes it.
Okay. Wait, what'd you say?
Check in your browser, see if that fixes it. See if you can see it in the console now. That's okay. You have a different problem in your script.js. What does the error, what is that error trying to tell you? Assignment to a constant variable.
I have to put like let.
Mm-hmm. So it's trying to tell you, hey, on 16, you're assigning something to a const. Where do we declare posts? Where do we make posts for the first time?
Let me find it. I don't think it's on this page.
It is.
Is it? Oh, it's right here.
Yep. Change that over to a let. Save. Okay, your post is showing up. Click read more on either one, and you see your timestamp and you're caught up. Good to go.
Thanks.
Of course.
Can you help me find my timestamp?
I
I'm
sure
trying to
can.
debug. I keep getting null. All right.
Okay, so the first thing that I notice is
I didn't save it.
no,
Oh.
that the timestamp is not in the URL. So if it's not in the URL,
Oh.
oops, sorry. If it's not in the URL up at the top, there's no chance that we're going to be able to pull it out from our JavaScript. So if I go back and click read more, we still don't have it up there. So the problem is not with anything on here. The problem is actually in our script.js. So down here, you do have your timestamp added. I is confused. It's all there. And you add that there. And there are no errors here. And it shows it there.
Oh. See you now.
Maybe we just needed to refresh because it seems to be
Oh.
working now.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
so now if we go read more and look in the console, it shows up.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think you just had to go back to your home page, refresh it so it was generating it out, and then when you clicked on read, it had it included.
Okay.
Okay, last call for any questions. Anyone who needs help. Terry.
Well, I don't really need help. I just wanted like to say like when you like helping them like do their debugging, I think it's a like good practice when it comes to debugging because when you was helping Shadia, I think that's her name. Like when you help her out, and then when I like read like the error code, like the comes, I'm like, okay. So I was looking at her code. I'm like, okay, okay. Oh, I see it. You gotta put her on like line stuff. You gotta change that from a console let. So I just wanted to point out that it's definitely definitely a good I guess helpful thing to learn how to debug and stuff.
Yeah, and it's a really good note because you know, oftentimes I see the error immediately, but I'm not just gonna be like line 11. Well, sometimes I am, depends how tired I am. But there are other times that I'm gonna go, all right, let's think through this because everyone gets an error and they just get frustrated with the error itself, right? And you're like, it's not working. And it's like, well, yeah, but the error is telling you where the error is and what the error is. So you got to figure out why that error is there in the first place, right? And so that's why group debugging is really helpful. And I will totally call you out if you have the same exact problem as someone else, because what that says to me is, oh, I tuned out when someone else was getting their problem fixed, and now I have the same problem. So that's why we spend the class in time going through it. One, the most common way to see errors that other people are going to get is to actually see what errors they got in the first place, right? And so debugging through that is definitely a experience, not just so everyone's on the same page and everyone has running code, but so that you can learn and go, oh, I didn't get that error before, but because someone else has, now I know how to deal with it when it does pop up. Very good point. All right, anyone else need help before we continue here? Okay. So let's finish this off before break. So now we've got our date ID, and we're like, all right, now we finally have the piece that we care about. So I come into my find, and remember, this is a for loop basically that runs until it finds the post that we care about. So what we are going to do, I'm actually going to rename this to search post, just so it's a little bit better name. And we're going to say, hey, for the post that we're searching for, we're looping over all of them, find where the timestamp equals the date ID that we pulled out from right here. Then console log my post. So we save, we come in, and it says undefined. And I'm like, what do you mean it's undefined? I'm gonna go pop open my array, and I'm looking here, and the post that we're looking for has a timestamp that ends in 618, and my timestamp up here is 618, and I'm like, why can't you find it? Well, if we look at the type of our date ID, it is a string. And we go, son of a, data types gets us again. What do we do when we say triple equals? The triple equals is saying find where not only the date ID's value matches the search post's timestamp, we also are saying and where the data type of the search post timestamp lines up with the data type of date ID. It turns out whenever we pull values out of the URL params, they come out as a string. Just like local storage, anytime we use URL params, they come out as a string, even if we put a number or a Boolean or anything in them. So there are two ways of fixing this. We can either take one of those equals out, and we can say, hey, we don't care about the data types of date ID or timestamp. All we care about is that their values match. If we do that and save, what we should see is that when we log out our post, we find second post. And if we go back and click on the first post, we get the first post showing up in the console. The other way of solving this is we can use a triple equals here, and we can do a parse int based off of the date ID. Where else have we seen parse? We saw parse in our JSON.parse, except this time we don't have JSON. We don't have some complex data format. All we have is an integer, which is another way of saying a whole number, right? And so we can parse the int here and leave our triple equals in. Parsing is going to convert this string into a number. And then because the search post timestamp is also a number, these two will line up. So two different ways of solving the problem. This, I think, is slightly preferred because in JavaScript, we almost always want to be using our triple equals. We can get into situations where if we compare 0 to false, that will actually come out as true. And we're like, well, 0 doesn't equal false, but because 0 is a falsy value, it does. So anyway, triple equals are generally preferred. We parse that out, but this is essentially accomplishing the same thing as a double equals. And if everything is working, whatever data is showing up in the console should match the read more button that you clicked on from the homepage. Terry.
So the triple equal sign it seemed like is a bit more stricter than the double equal sign. Like is
It
there
sure
like a
is.
real difference, or is it just like they is, or is it like just the triple equal sign is more preferred than double equal sign? That I don't really get it.
Both. What we're doing is don't follow me on this code. This is just an example. We can say const num1 equals 1 and const num2 equals 1 in quotes. Well, if we console log out, does num1 equal num2? We're going to get true on that. Well, why? When 1 is a string and 1 is a number, because double equals is just checking the value of them. It isn't checking the data types. When we add that third equal in, this now becomes false. So the triple equals, the third equal sign, is saying not only check their values, not only compare their values, also make sure that their data types are the same. Does that help? Any other questions? Okay, we've finally done all of the work to get the posts out of memory that we care about. So now we can throw this stuff on the page. I'm going to go to my read.html. I'm going to head into my body tag and add in a div with an ID of post. And then in my JavaScript, because I have access to the individual posts, I've already dealt with the array of all of the posts. So I don't need a for loop here like I needed on my homepage, because we don't need to loop over all of the posts. We already did that work to get the individual posts out. So we can say document get element by ID, get our post. That again, we have to make sure that we create right here in that div. And we're going to set the inner HTML of that equal to a template literal, so backticks instead of quotes. And we'll throw an h5 in with the post.title. Maybe we'll throw a p tag in with the post.author. We'll throw in a another p tag with the post.timestamp, where we will convert that into a new date so it shows up as something other than numbers. Make sure you put a T in title so you don't have tile. Thank you for the catching that spelling mistake. And then finally, we'll do a p tag with our post.content. Close that p tag off. Go ahead and save, and we should see our post show up. Clean maybe some of this up with a .to locale string. Should make our date show up a little nicer, and we can throw all of this in a container, which will format it out for us a little bit. So more styling in here if we wanted. Maybe kill some of the margin on this. And the word by. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Maybe throw a little margin on the top of this of 15 pixels. Okay, just little tweaks. We will pause there. Break until 7:25, and I will stick around for the next 5 minutes in case any of you have questions. Takes you 5 minutes to catch up to this. That's totally fine. Giving you a full 30 minutes for break. All right, last call for questions before break until 7:25. Okay, so where did we leave off? We left off where our homepage had 2 read more buttons on it. We went into the script.js, and in our ahref right here, right, in the link that takes us to the read page, we put this question mark. That question mark is special to all web browsers. It knows that, hey, any information after this question mark isn't actually a path. It's not a different page to take you to. It's not actually looking for that question mark in the file name. It's saying, hey, anything after this question mark are going to be what we call params, right? So we put a key in called timestamp, and then we actually use the template literal to drop the value of the timestamp in. So if we inspect that and take a look in the ahref, we see that individual timestamp, right? If we go and look at another button, we see a different timestamp showing up in there. That is because when we created those posts, it had different times. We are then dropping that information into the link here so that when we click on that link, we can actually see that in the URL up here, right? We can see whatever post we clicked on. Then when we go to that read page, it doesn't look like anything's on this. But if we go look in our read.js, what is our read.js doing? It is saying, hey, go into local storage, pull out the posts. Because local storage always returns a string, we need to parse that out. Then we need to go into the URL and get the params. Then go get the param of timestamp. So we're going in, we're looking for something where timestamp is equal to. It gets this number right here, and it stores it in date ID. Well, now that we've got the ID, we've got to filter through all of the posts to find the one post that we care about. So we go into posts, which has nicely been parsed out using JSON from a string into an array. And then we find the post by looping through all of them, searching for a post where the timestamp is equal to the date ID that we pulled out of the search params. But just like in our local storage, it returning things as strings, params also returns things as strings. So we parse out the date ID to make sure that the type is also equal in addition to the value. So we find the individual post. And a reminder at this point, the post is an object. If we take a look in our console, we can see all of the data that we stored in there. That post is then generating out a template literal that is using the values from the object to place that inside the inner HTML of post, which is ultimately going to make it show up on our div ID post right here. We may want to do one more thing. We can add in an href that says back to homepage. Oh, sorry, href should have been just a slash for the index. And then we can say back to homepage. We save that, we get our nice little link there. We click on the link, it takes us back to our homepage. Just a little a tag that we added outside of the div ID post. If we put it inside the div ID post, we would actually have it replaced by our JavaScript, and that link would disappear as soon as the JavaScript ran. Okay, any questions about the read more flow before we implement the login? Once we are done with the login, we'll use the last 30 minutes of class to number out all of this documentation.
You still gonna do a delete button?
We threw the delete button. We'll see if we have time. I think the plan will be for tomorrow to do the self-assessment, see how long that takes, and then whatever time that we have left, we will do a delete and maybe even an edit button, depending on how long that takes. We ready for our login? Any other questions about this flow?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't get my href link to pop up.
Share screen?
Back to homepage.
You didn't put it in the div ID post, did you?
Yeah, I think so. Let's see.
Should be outside of that.
Oh. Okay.
Because our post is going to get overwritten by our line 18 of our JavaScript.
Okay. So after.
Yep. And there you
Oh,
go.
it's there. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? Okay. Let's get our login working. So I'm thinking about on my homepage, you should only be able to write a post if you are signed in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to index. And again, this is not the most secure way of building a login page. In order to build a secure login page, we really need a database or an API server that's going to store the password in an encrypted manner, all of that stuff. So I don't want you to look at this and be like, oh, we built login using blog, so I can build login using the same method in my capstone. We will be covering a much more secure way of building a login authentication system. I want to show you how we do this just for more JavaScript practice, right? We build a form, we get the values out of the form, we do something in the JavaScript logic, and then we take you to another place based off of that logic. So say it for the last time, hopefully tonight, this is not a secure way of building a login system. We are only going through this exercise for the sake of getting more JavaScript practice. This is not how you should build a login system in any production code. With all of that said, let's dive in. I know that instead of down here where I have my write a post button, instead what I want is a button to log in. So I'm going to create that page called login.html. I will exclamation point enter to drop my template in. I'm gonna go grab my link tag for Bootstrap. I'm gonna put that into my login.html. I am going to throw a container in here. Joe asked a good question. He said, is it ideal for the login to be the index.html? In this case, no, because we don't want everyone to sign in to have to read the blog. We want everyone to be able to read the blog post, but only the authenticated users be able to create a new post. That is not the case for some websites. Some websites, you say, I want the whole thing locked down. You don't get to access any of the information until you're signed in. If that is the case, then yes, you can totally hijack your index.html and make it your login page, and then you can make your like homepage more of like a dashboard.html or a first.html or something like that. So
Yeah, that's what I did for mine.
yeah, and that's totally fine. Just depends on what the UX flow is, basically. Okay. We are going to add a script tag. Oh, we're in the wrong spot. Script tag down in the body with an src to login.js. We need to make our login.js. And once we've done that, again, exclamation point enter for the template, copy and paste the Bootstrap tag in, create a div class container for our site contents to go into, and then also create a script tag for our login.js. We also created login.js so that we can start writing some JavaScript. Now that we have done all of that, we are going to head back to our index.html. We're going to scroll down to the links, and we're just going to comment out write a post for now. And we're going to replace it with an ahref to login.html with a button that says login. If we check our homepage, our write a post button should be gone and now should show login as an A tag. And to catch up there, commented out the new post anchor tag. We added in a new anchor tag for login. We linked it to login.html. Then we just did our basic page setup in the login. He hadn't moved in, so I will give you guys a minute and then we will dive in. Anyone need a minute or need help? Okay. So we got to think about our login page, right? Right now, it's just a nice white blank page. So if we think about what does a basic login page need? Well, it needs a username and a password, right? So if we head over to getbootstrap.com, jump into the documentation, and scroll down to the form section in the overview, if we scroll down enough, this looks tempting, right? Because it's got an email, a password, a submit button. We could take this whole thing, but this is a lot of HTML that we're working with, right? Because it's got the label, it's got this div ID email help that we may not need. It's got this checkbox. So whenever you're working with Bootstrap, I call it the kitchen sink is always at the top, right? Everything but the kitchen sink. Well, this is the kitchen sink. This has everything in it. This may be a little overwhelming to parse through all of this HTML and delete out the parts that we don't want. often it's easier to take only the parts that we do want as opposed to the whole thing. So if I scroll down a little bit more, not in here, let's check in form control. Form control has a much easier example for me, right? It's got just the label and the input. And I'm like, all right, I can work with that. So I'm going to take just this first div. I'm going to head back over to my login.html. I'll throw an H1 up at the top that says login, so we know what page we're on. Before we put in any inputs, we need to link all of this to a form, right? So that when they submit the form, we're able to pull the data out. So I'm going to add a form tag in. And then I will paste in that snippet that I just copied from Bootstrap. I'm going to update some of that. I will say the first one is going to be a username instead of an email. There are pros and cons of using usernames over emails, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll do it username. I will say it is a label for the username. I'm going to update my ID to username. And I'm going to take out this placeholder because I don't want any placeholder to show up. And finally, I'll change the type from email to text. If you leave it as type email, some browsers will actually enforce that you have an @ sign in the input. And so usernames, we won't require an input to be an email address. We will do that one more time. I'm going to come outside of my div tag. I'm going to paste in again. And this time I'm going to update it so the label 4 becomes password. The label will be password. The type will be password. The class we leave the same because that's going to have the Bootstrap styling. The ID will be password. And the placeholder we will take out entirely. We finish all of this up, and then I will take a break and let you catch up with a button with a class of BTN and BTN primary that says login, a type of submit, and I will pause there. This is what your page should look like. I will pause and pull there just to give you all a minute to catch up on all of that HTML. If you are reading that HTML, you have probably reached that point where you can read it all and go, yeah, I could do that on my own with enough time. We've crossed that threshold where now you can say, all right, I'll just copy and paste this now. I understand what's going on. But if you'd like to practice, of course, you're welcome to type it all out. Quick shout out. Thank you guys for having your cameras on. Normally at this point in the cohort, we normally have students go, I think I can get away with not having my camera on. And I have not had to remind any of you. And it's totally fine to have it off for portions. I'm not trying to shame anyone. I'm genuinely saying thank you. It makes it much easier to teach. Biggest, most important thing right now is that you have your ID set to username and your ID set to password on the inputs. If you don't have other things figured out, if the labels aren't lining up, all of that's okay for now. The biggest thing is that the IDs are correct because that's going to impact our JavaScript. Joe.
What is the 4 equals doing for the label?
The 4 is lining up with the ID. for two reasons. One's for accessibility, so that when this input is read aloud using a screen reader, it knows that this label is tied to this input. So if the user uses voice control, they can say, click into the field that has the label of username, and they will know that it lines up with this input. The other benefit of it is that when you click on username, it will focus that particular field instead of having to click into it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Will it work without putting the 4 in? Yes. But it just, you won't be able to click on the label to have it focus into the input. And we should always strive for accessible code. All right, most of you are voted in. I'm going to give you guys 30 more seconds here, and then we will keep going. You're wondering what this MB3 is. M stands for margin, B stands for bottom, and 3 is the value of it. So it's just a way to add some margin to the bottom without having to write out margin bottom colon and setting a pixel value. And yes, I did just learn that by Googling it 30 seconds ago. Okay, anyone need help? This is one of the few times that it's okay to copy and paste the HTML because we are just working with form elements. We're working with HTML. Hopefully that is becoming more comfortable. But if anyone needs a quick speed boost, happy to provide it. Okie doke. So we got everything wired up. It's looking good. We got our username, we got our password field. Now we got to make it work, right? This is where it's more fun for me. I do HTML to get the HTML out of the way so I can have more fun in JavaScript land. So I'm going to go to my form and I'm going to add an on submit that says login form submitted. It's going to take an event. I am going to head down into my login.js and make my function called login form submitted. That is going to take my event. Whenever we are working with a form where we want to write the JavaScript instead of it sending out over the internet, when we don't want the page to refresh, we always need to put our event prevent default in. The event prevent default prevents the page from doing the default action, which is refreshing it to send it over to the server. We don't have a server here. We say don't refresh the page. Then we need to get out the username and the password. So we're going to say const username is going to be, and I'm going to do it two different ways just to show you that it can be done both ways, achieves the exact same thing. We can go to our event, which was the form submitting. We can get the target, which is the form itself. We can access the elements inside of the form to get the username field, if you spell it right, and we can get the value from that. We can also go const password, and instead of going through the event target, which is slightly more efficient, we can also say document get element by ID, go get the password field, and grab the value from that. Both achieve the exact same thing. Both are totally fine to use. What you do want to do, however, for both of them is console log out the username and the password to make sure that those values are coming through. move that over here. I'm going to type in ABC. I'm going to type 123 in the password. When we hit login, we should see that in the console. If you do not see that in the console, make sure that your ID is password and your ID is username on the input itself, not on the label. And we're going to go for super basic in this login system. What are the two things that we need to do for any login system? That was not a rhetorical question. What are the two things we need to do for any login system? I'm going to assume that none of you have logged into a system ever before, so you'd have no idea how to build a login system.
I'm sorry, Max. What did you say? I was trying to fix my the login. It wasn't doing it right. So
What are the two things that any login system needs to do?
Needs to log in.
well, first they need to check whether the password is right or not in the username.
That's it. Those
Yeah.
are our two.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
The username right and is the password right. That's it. That's all we got to
I feel
do.
like it was a trick question. I was like, what is
Yeah,
this?
that's what I was
The
thinking.
wording was very
It's got to have a
confused.
forgot
A little
password. It's got
cryptic.
to have a hashing algorithm. It's got to no. Basic. The username's got to match and the password's got to match. Now, of course, if we were building out a full on login system, we would build this differently to support multiple users. We're not even going to do that. We're keeping this basic. All we're trying to do is practice our JavaScript here. So all we're going to do is we're going to say if the username does not equal, and now we can make up whatever username we want. I'm going to say Max. Then we're going to alert wrong username. Get out. Else, if the password does not equal secret, alert wrong password. Get out. Else something. Okay, so if the username does not equal Max, I don't care what password you're typing in, we're going to tell you it's the wrong username and we're going to stop everything. Else, if the password does not equal the word secret, then the username must be Max, right? Because we already checked for that, but the password may not match. So if the password doesn't match, send out another error message that says, hey, the password's wrong. Don't do anything. But if we get down to this else statement, that means that if the username must equal Max and the password must equal secret. So if the only way to get down to this else is the username is Max and the password is secret. Joe, you could do a double ampersand and do it all together if you only wanted one alert. If you wanted to say username or password is incorrect, which is technically more secure, you could do it with an ampersand and that would be totally fine. But because we want two separate error messages in this case, doing it with two else ifs is totally fine.
Oh, I was talking about like verifying whether the username is correct. Because if you put a different username in there, wouldn't it just roll, like allow you to get through if if you get the password correct though?
No, because it would hit this if statement and it would not run either
Oh, change it, right. I see what you're saying.
because it's chained with the else if. So if they got the username wrong or they got the password wrong, show an alert. Otherwise, where do we want to take them if they are logged in?
The home page, right?
Not the home page, the new post page,
Yeah.
right? Because if they're signed in, the only reason you would sign into this blog is to write a new post.
Right.
So now that is a good thing to note for your capstones. That may not be the case for you. Your capstone, they may want to get in and get to back to the homepage so they can hit the edit button on posts. And that's actually something we'll do when we revisit this project and start making it full stack. So the answer is not always take them to a new post. The answer on your project may vary. But for now, we're going to say, hey, if they have signed in, take them to new post.html. So we save, I come over, I type in the wrong username and the wrong password. I hit login. It says wrong username, get out. I type the right username in and the wrong password, and it says wrong password, get out. And if I type in secret and hit login, it takes me to the new post. Apparently, the password secret has been compromised in a data breach, and it does not recommend I use that password. Thank you, Google. Trust me, I've never used secret as a password, even on local projects outside of class. Okay, one last thing we need to do in this project, and then we will go through and document and go from there. I got to my new post. I'm happy. Now I'm going to go back to my homepage, and I have my login button. And I'm like, come on, man, I just logged in. I don't want to have to log in again to make a new post. Well, we can fix this. And again, this is not a secure way of doing it, but just for practicing with our JavaScript, with local storage, with our document object model, with if statements, we can fix that. Here, I'm going to say, okay, before you go to the new post.html, go to window, local storage, and set an item called logged in to yes. So we save that. Then I'm going to go back to my script.js, which I'll put up here. Again, this is the only line that we added into that else statement. And down towards the bottom of my script.js, I'm going to say if there's a window.localstorage.getItem logged in, if it is equal to the word yes, then document get element by ID. Go grab the ID. Oh, we did class on that. Let's add an ID on that of links. So in my index.html, I added an ID of links to my div class links. And then finally, in the script.js, I can say get element by ID links, go to the inner HTML, and instead make it equal to an A tag, which goes to the ahref of new posts.html and says new post. And we close out that A tag. And finally, I still see my login button. I can type in Max and my super secret password. And when I go back to my homepage, I see new post instead of login. Be
I'm
2
having an
minutes.
issue with mine.
Yep, share screen.
Pull this over here. Okay. I don't know where this error is coming from. Everything seems to be working fine.
Take me to your login.js. What?
Yeah, I don't know.
Um,
Should I just refresh the page and see if it goes away?
you can try it. My other guess is
Oh,
no, just take one of those out and that should fix it.
gotcha. Yep.
All right, how are we feeling? Before I go on my rampage of numbering everything out and doing comments, now is the time to ask questions, because they will fall out of your brain while I am numbering things. So much better to ask any questions you have now instead of waiting until I get to that spot in the page. Going once. Going twice. All right, start numbering. So I'm going to close everything out. And we're going to go through this. I may overwrite some of the previous numbering that we've done when our paths diverge. Because this time, we've got so much flow going on, we should do it exactly the way the computer is doing it, not necessarily the order that the user is thinking about doing these steps. So we're going to dive in a little bit. We still pull in Bootstrap. We still link to our style sheet. We still create the post as a placeholder. We still get down to 4, which is create a link. But this is now changed. So this is now 4, create a link to login page. Then we get into 5. So all of the numbers after 5 now need to go. Give me 1 second to clean some of that up. Now we'll just do it as we go. Screw it. Okay, 5. Run script.js, which is the JavaScript for homepage. Now we come in and say 6, go to local storage and get the item out with the key of posts. 7, local storage returns a value out as a string, so we need to parse it. 8, test to make sure that we can actually access the posts. 9, make an empty string to store our HTML. 10, check to see if there is not, which is what that exclamation point says, any posts in the string. 11, the first time the site loads, there are no posts, so show a message in our HTML. We ignore this entire else statement and we come all the way down until here. And we say 11, 12. Put the no posts message into the HTML from number 11. Then we come down here and we say number 13, check local storage to see if user is logged in. They aren't, so we ignore this. That's it. Computer's done. It's like, I've done everything that you've asked me to. I am now finished. Now we click on we click on the login button. Yes, I realize that there's no log out. That's what I just hacked my way around, but we'll do that down the road. So we click the login button. We come in, we find where our login button is. We say 13, 14. Man, I'm counting off by one tonight. User clicks login button and the browser takes them to that page. We go to login. 15. Make a form for user to fill out. 16. Run login.js. 17. Make function called login form submitted, but don't run it yet. So we're now on the login page. The user enters their username and password, and 18, user enters valid username and password and submits the form. We then jump back into our JavaScript and we say 19. Form is submitted. So run the function. We should say 20, prevent the page from refreshing. 21, get username and password typed in values from form inputs. 2 different
What's up, man?
ways of achieving this.
What? Let's see.
22, check to make sure the username is exactly max. 23, check to make sure the password is exactly secret. 24, the username and pass are correct. So store local storage key so we know the user is signed in for future visits. And then 25, redirect them to the new post page. Pausing there, 25 seems like a good number. Any questions so far?
I just had a quick one.
Yeah.
For number 22,
Mhm.
if you took out one of those equal signs, would that still work? But just not have it be like case sensitive, or what
It's
would that
not
do?
about case sensitive. It still would work. But basically, you could do, so the double equals here is the equivalent of the triple equals in checking for equal to. It is checking not only to make sure that whatever got typed in is the letters MAX, it's also checking to make sure that whatever got typed in was a string itself. So in this case, because it's coming from the document object model, the double or the triple equals or the single or double equals would work here. But in general, we almost always want to lean towards using triple equals or double equals in the not operator, because we don't want to check just for, hey, does max equal max? We also want to make sure that we're comparing a string to a string. Yeah, very rarely you get caught in some cases where you say, does 0 equal false? No, of course 0 doesn't equal false. Well, in JavaScript, 0 does equal false if you use a double equal operator. 0 does not equal false if you use a triple equal operator, or a exclamation point equal equal. And so that's where you want to be careful, because a lot more things equal false than you realize, like the number 0.
Thank you.
Yep. In this case, you would be fine because it's coming from the document object model, and that should always return a string. But in general, using 2 equals in a not operator or 3 in an equal operator is a good idea. Equal comparison operator. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so we take them to new post.html, which is, excuse me, taking us to 26. Pull in Bootstrap again. 27, link to the style sheet. 28 creates the form. 29 creates the inputs. 30 adds the type button submit. 31 runs new posts.js. Now we head to new posts.js. We say 32. This function is triggered when the form is submitted. We ignore that entire function and the page is done. Until we go into new post and we say 33. Form is submitted with valid inputs, just saying, hey, all of that was entered in. So we go 33 back into our new post. We'll say 34 function now runs because form is submitted. Put that inside. We'll say 35 prevent the default action. 36 go get the form. 37 retrieve existing posts from local storage. 38 create a let variable so we can access it outside the if statement block scope. Number 39, check to see if there are existing posts in storage. 40, there aren't, so make posts an empty array. 41, create the post object with all the form inputs. 42, add the object from 41 to the end of the array from number 40. 43, convert the posts into the string. From the array from 42. So we're converting this over. Then we're going to say 44, store the string from 43 into local storage using the key post, and then 45, redirect the user to the home page. Now we finally go back to the home page. It goes and it does all of this stuff again and gets all the way down to 46. Run this JS again. Did I number that right? New post, script 45, yeah. 46. Run this JS again because we just got redirected here from number 45 after creating a new post. Go back into script.js. It goes back through. It's going to do this all over again. So it's going to go 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, check to see if there are posts, but now we hit 52. This time there are posts in storage. So sort them by timestamp. So the newest posts are first. 53, create a template literal. Just take out those numbers for now. 53 loops over everything, gets down to 54. Use the HTML we generated to make them show up. And then after it finally makes all the posts show up, it still does 55, which is check local storage. The user is now do it like this. The user is now signed in. So 56, update the links div to show the new post link instead of the login button. All right, we made it to the end. I know that's super boring to hear me in the most monotonous tone, but I cannot have inflection in my voice and also type. And clearly I can't type that well because I saw like 19 different typos. But hard to read code, explain it, number it, and read it aloud. So we've reached the end of the blog project for now. Tomorrow, if we have time after the self-assessment, we will come back to this and maybe add a delete button, maybe an edit button. There's a lot more that we can do in this. We will be coming back to this project, but not for a solid like month or month and a half. Because what we need to do is we need to learn about the API. We need to learn about databases. We need to learn about authentication. And then we'll come back to this project, blow all the dust off of it, rebuild this in React and with an API. So this project is the project that is just like a zombie. It never fully dies. But this is also the project where you'll also start to connect some dots on your capstone and go, oh, I have a more details button in my capstone. I can click on that, pull the data out, and show that kind of information. So you don't have to do that for your capstone for your next check-in, but hopefully there are some cogs now turning of, now I see, why do we need JavaScript? JavaScript can generate dynamic content. It can build a login system. It can make that content show up on the page. It can respond to user actions when they fill out a form. It can make page redirects happen. It can loop over data to generate things out based off of a loop. Hopefully this is a project where we're starting to see, okay, yeah, I've been told I need to learn JavaScript, but hopefully we're starting to see the potential of it. I'm going to push this to GitHub before I forget so that you guys can reference it. Nothing you need to do to prepare for tomorrow's class. Which will be the self-assessment. I will stick around for a couple minutes in case any of you guys have questions. Otherwise, you are welcome to get out of here.
Yeah, I actually have a question. So for like the login page, I noticed like some websites like they have like the home page where you could like log in and like the login like kind of drops down the home page, but it doesn't go to like another page. Is that like I guess a good way of using like the login, or is that
Yeah, that's totally fine. You need to be careful there because sometimes you underestimate how much a login needs to do. So you got to think about like, well, if the login fails, we need to make sure that there's space for an error message to show up. And then like, oh, what about forgot password? So now I need to get a link in for that. And then all of a sudden you start to realize that you only have so much space in that one little area. So it depends. There are definitely websites that do it, and that's completely fine. So if you want to implement that, you can. In Bootstrap, I think there is something called collapsible. Collapse. Where if you click on this, it, it like kind of slides down and shows you that kind of information. So you can try that. The drop down is something similar. This is more of like a list, but you could try and achieve it with a drop down. And then, of course, the final option is a modal, so that you can actually click on the login button and it will gray out the rest of the screen and show you a form on top of it. So I've seen them done all those ways. I've also seen people say, you're trying to log in, just go to a login page and I'll show you the form fields there. So whatever one matches your style the closest, that is totally fine to use.
I went down a weird rabbit hole.
Of things that shouldn't be equal to each other and somehow are in JavaScript.
Well, I was trying to find out exactly what I figured it was had to do with how it's processing the data types. And I just was looking at all the math behind why it's. I didn't realize they were setting it to essentially equal like infinity and negative infinity.
Yeah.
As a limit to handle errors and stuff, which is cool. I didn't know that that was a thing. Just
yeah, I mean, the joke in
mathematical validity.
The joke in JavaScript is everything's an object. Right? So like when you're doing any kind of object-oriented programming in JavaScript, it kind of makes sense that everything's an object. But if you do something like const my array equals that, and then you log out the type of my array, you would expect array to come out, and instead you get object. That causes all kinds of problems. So in ES2, like literally the second version of JavaScript, they added a function called array.isArray, where you can pass it my array, and that actually gives you true. But if you pass that an object, you get false, which is what you would expect. But in any other programming language, if you ask the data type of an array or a Python list or like whatever their equivalent is, you would expect to get array out. And in JavaScript, an array is an object.
Right.
So,
is that just why? Because JavaScript is classifying the two as the same thing?
correct. Yes.
Okay.
Even though they are distinct data types that are like literally the core top 5, top 6 most used data types in all of JavaScript. And yet type of does not differentiate between the two of them, even though at the syntax level, it differentiates between the two of them. And so you can read a lot of articles of people like explaining why it is that way. But now that they have done that, they can't undo that. So there are literally if statements that people have written that says if it comes back as an object, then check to see inside as a nested if statement if it is an array or an object. So if they change that, all of this legacy code now breaks because an array isn't coming back as an object, it's coming back as an actual array. And so
They just added a new isArray.
So they added array is array, and that solves it. But every time I do that, I go type of, and I go, it's not an object. Like there's no way that's an and then oh shit, it's an array, and you got to go back through and array.isArray it. So there are certainly quirks of JavaScript. The problem is that JavaScript is such a widely used language that you now have to make it reverse compatible.
Right.
And that was a big deal when Python went from 2 to 3. They were like, no, it's not going to be reverse compatible. So like if you run Python 2 code in Python 3, there are some things that will not run the exact same way.
It's so crazy. I'm on like WTFJS.com, just like looking through some of the fun ones.
I will say
Yeah.
there have been times where I've gotten hit where I used the double equals and should have used the triple equals, but now that's kind of just muscle memory for me. So like I always use a triple equals at this point. I wouldn't even consider using a double equals, but the vast majority of the ones on WTFJS, I'm like, never in my entire professional career times 10 would I ever run into that problem. Right. And like,
Right.
I'm not coding at Google. I'm not dealing with numbers in the trillions values. I really love doing advent of code because they give
Yeah.
you like a data structure and then you got to work with that data structure.
We worked with that guy that made that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know he's local. But I always get to like day 15 of advent of code. And of course it depends on what the challenges are. But it's always around day 12, 15, 17, somewhere around there, where the only solution is to like this year it was you had to find a common denominator because like the numbers got so big that you had to find the common denominator so you could store the smaller number of both of the values. And I just got to the point where I'm like, nope, I'm done. I don't want to have to do
Too much math.
Yeah, it's just like, and it was one of those things where I'm like, I'm not going to be able to do this unless I cheat and look at an answer. And I saw the answer and I'm like, I thought through it. I wrote it out in my code. I did the next couple days and then another math one popped up and I was like, tapping out. I'm done. 2 weeks of this is enough for me.
How does C handle stuff like that? Because C is pretty old. How to like updating and making? Do they make like applications reverse compatible, or do they like hit major version numbers of the?
I've never written in C, only barely touched C sharp, because .NET's a pretty popular full stack web framework. From what I know about C, this is going to sound really terrible because I hate Java, but Java was a major upgrade to C because it had built-in memory management. So I remember in computer science classes, it was like, oh, well, there's a pointer and the pointer's going into RAM and,
Right.
storing the value. And there's Java is such an amazing language because it has garbage collection in it. So
Yep.
when it's done reading it, you don't have to release the variables compared to C, at least in the earlier versions of it.
You can do it manually though.
You can.
Well, you can suggest to have Java
Yes.
the garbage collection come.
Just like you can, there's a delete keyword in JavaScript, right? But it's like the level I write code, I'm like, are you kidding? Like at the end of my program, I need to delete out every variable. And then it's like, well, what if I do something in a for loop? Like that is just like insane to me that you would even have to think about that. And in C you do, but
It sounds like a pain.
you're also dealing with 4 trillion web results at Google and you need your
Right.
algorithm to run. And at that point, you do need to do manual memory management because the computer literally can't do garbage collection fast enough. So like there are legitimate use cases for C, probably C++ at this point. I don't think there's a major speed difference between C and C++. Could be wrong about it. Never written either one of them. But I do know that there are legitimate use cases for it.
Yeah, that's all my kind of. I'm loving that so far for in school. I didn't think I was gonna like. I sat there and watched the whole video on the stack heap and garbage collection, was great.
Well, and I mean, like, it's cool to that's when big O notation actually is helpful, because like you can't understand the magnitude of speed without learning big O notation, and then once you learn that, it can be really helpful. So I mean, it's just the difference between computer engineering and computer science, right? And then the next step above that, which colleges unfortunately aren't teaching, which is development, full stack web development, or any really kind of application development.
I have one class. It's an elective that is like intro to web development, and I don't think it covers a whole lot, but
Yeah, I mean, they'll touch on HTML and CSS. They may, if you're lucky, touch on like PHP dynamically generating HTML. They may touch on a database, but like,
I didn't see any frameworks.
yeah, yeah. So that's the interesting part is that there is an overlap between computer engineering, computer science, and development, right? Even though there's no apples to apples comparison of development at the college curriculum level. There are a couple colleges that do like a degree in application development. So I shouldn't badmouth all colleges, but it is very interesting to see like where does one end and the other one start? Like where is that overlap? Because computer science, you're going to talk more OS level, where like you do have to understand the basic hardware, but you're not doing binary gates and like understanding like, actual circuit logic.
Yeah, one of my classes I have set up is I think it's the data structures class that kind of goes into that more computer engineering level of it.
Yeah.
There's a couple other like I'm surprised that they had these classes, but where it's getting more into like they have a class like just on like Linux and like kernels and stuff, which was cool. I think Oswego has a better program at the bachelor's level.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound like I'm bad mouthing computer
Oh, no,
engineering
yeah. No, I
or
get it.
computer science. Like there are legitimate jobs in that field. I just am not in that field. And I find it amazing that there is the entire field of application development that is just not taught, right? So I'm not trying to say that computer engineering or computer science is bad. It's just that I think there should be a third.
It's behind. Yeah, it's a little behind.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a project management class that was taught at the iSchool. And we finally got to like the Scrum Agile section. And I'm like really excited because I just finished an internship at AOL. They did Agile. I was like, oh, this is great. I'm finally gonna learn it from like someone who's trained to teach, instead of just learning it on the job. And he was like, yeah, no one uses it. I was like, kidding me? Like there's research coming out from like Deloitte on like 75% of companies have switched over to agile already. Like waterfall is what is dying a slow death, and unless you're doing like government contracting, everyone is switching over to agile project management.
Right. Where you have
And
like sprints and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and the professor is like, I'm retiring next year, I'm not going to learn it, so I'm not going to teach it.
Yeah, I got lucky. I have some good professors. They're all like they have a Discord for computer science. And
Okay.
it's just like they got all the different classes for that degree. And they
Yeah.
have all the instructors in there, and they'll like I got booted out of the curriculum for the intro to computing sciences because I already had such a like deep foundational knowledge of computer science from high school.
Yeah.
Like go do something else. Like, you're wasting your time.
I had pissed me off so much. I still don't have my bachelor's degree, mainly because I haven't passed writing 105. But the I took intro to SQL and intro to database design as a like community college in high school, and ended up getting my Oracle certification. Can't remember if it was 2 or just 1, but like, Oracle is top 3 biggest SQL companies. Not that only they do a lot more than SQL, but they are a very popular SQL database. And anyway, I got my certifications. I went through all of that, and they said, the iSchool said to me, you can either transfer in the 6 credits, but you have to retake the Intro to SQL course, or you can transfer in 3 credits, but you don't have to take the class. And then their argument was, well, we don't know that the community college curriculum is as robust as ours. And I said, I got the certification. Like, it doesn't matter, right? Like, and then I said, well, if you don't know if it's as robust, why are you giving me the option of transferring in the credit at
Right.
all? Like, you
Exactly.
already approved the transfer credit. And so they were like, well, you can take all 6 credits to transfer in, but then you have to retake the class, and then if you retake the class, we'll give you another 3 credits. I was like, in what world does this make sense in terms of transferring, that I have the industry certification? And then their response was, well, our students don't get the industry certification, so we don't know how valid it is. Of Oracle.
Right.
This was
The
not
leading,
the community college certification.
right.
This was, I took the test from Oracle, and Oracle gave me the cert.
Yeah. Kind of like, it's kind of like setting you up with a class to take to get certified in PMI, and then you go to PMI and take their exam. That's rough. There's a few classes that they offer at Finger Lakes that do like they get you ready to take some of the CompTIA class or exams.
Yeah.
A couple of them in here, not necessarily for exams, but they have essentially like it's a whole semester of like a group project. Like you get assigned to a team to kind of mimic real world stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wish they had done that, because the iSchool had probably about 2/3 of the classes when I was there 10 years ago, that would have gotten you close to full stack development. So I wish there was some kind of capstone for graduation kind of thing. And then I will say, I'm not normally a big fan of certifications, only because the development industry in particular doesn't agree on, like, hey, this certification covers everything, or like, when I'm hiring someone, I've never seen a resume and looked at the certification and gone, oh, that's exactly what I need this person to do. But that's specifically for application development, whether it's web or traditional or anything. The exceptions to that are any SQL certification, any CompTIA certification. They don't do, at least last time I checked, they don't have like an application development one, but everything for security and help desk, those are certainly very valid. And then anything from PMI, if you were going to be a project manager, you absolutely have to do the PMI certification, because industry wise, if you're going to do full-time project management, a company won't even consider you unless you are either pursuing the certification or have it. So those are
Right.
the 3 exceptions I can think of off the top of my head, where in those, I don't call them niches of industry, but in those particular sectors, those certifications are as good as gold.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of, at least with the computer science associate's degree through SUNY, it kind of mimics the same kind of style that Careers in Code had, where the intro class sets you up. It kind of does like a crash course in a lot of different things. I had a conversation with my professor about what, from like a student perspective, what I thought could have been done a little bit better, because it kind of grazed a lot of stuff, but didn't really like bite into anything. But you get set up with your portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I had a portfolio already, which was cool. And then you work on projects, you can set them into there. And then throughout your classes, pursuing later on in the degree, you can add into it.
Yeah. Yeah, and we got a lot of feedback from cohort 1 and 2 of we jump into JavaScript projects too quickly. I don't understand the syntax. You got to do basics first. And so that's why cohort 3 all the way through 6, we have tried to do a week of this is a variable, this is a curly brace for an object, this is a curly brace for a function, like the more computer sciencey side of things. And every cohort since, we've gotten the feedback of like, I can't, all of this stuff doesn't sink into my memory because I don't understand when to use it. And I'm like,
Right. Yeah.
where's the middle ground there? Like, we got the feedback of we can't just do projects, even if they're basic projects, because I don't understand the syntax. And then we cover the syntax and they go, I can't memorize the syntax because I don't know when to use it.
Right. I think like we were talking about it last night too. Because I'm one of those people that likes to have a deeper understanding of things, but I'm not gonna know what questions to ask until like diving into it is what leads me down the path as to like, asking, why are we using an object versus an array, or any kind of like syntax question like that, or something.
Yeah, it's tough, and part of it is just like there's so much to learn that no matter what point you dive in, it's all gonna be a deep end. So like you got to just plunge in and then make your way to the shallow end, I guess.
Yep.
Maybe not the best analogy, but I do think that there's something to be said about like maybe there isn't a right way to do it. So you gotta start somewhere.
Yeah, I think you just gotta push through that a little bit.
Yeah. And it's a boot camp.
Alright.
We call it a boot camp for a reason.
Yeah. Summer semester is really kicking my butt so far. Intro to Java is not, well, I think it's intro to programming, but it's Java.
Okay.
Not that difficult. Took that in high school. Like that, it's taken me like a minute to 2 minutes to actually write all the labs. So
yeah,
I'm doing fine. My math classes that are rough.
I was so mad. I took the 200 level of the stats course, and had a terrible professor but a really good TA. And so my scores ended up going up because they had it wasn't a lab, but it was whatever the equivalent of the lab is, where they like give you the quizzes in the smaller sections. And that was run by the TAs. And so my grade started going up when I stopped attending lecture and started only attending the courses the TA was holding. And the TA realized how much people were struggling. So she did like a giant review. And then that was like where the light bulb went off. But this
For math?
professor was like, he would get to the end of it and be like, oh, well, that's not the right answer. Oh, the textbook must be wrong. This has to be the right answer. And then he would come in the next class and be like, no, I made a mistake in that other, in like halfway through
you
the
had
problem.
one job. You had one job.
I had that, and then I had another professor put slides up. And then he went on this whole like 5-minute rant about how much time I spend on these slides and making sure that they're like great learning materials for you, and I adjust them every class. And he did not realize in the bottom right hand corner it had like copyright Pearson, and it came right from the textbook.
Right. Yeah, I've been lucky so far with all my professors. I've had really, really good professors. So just good experiences all around
Good.
thus far.
All right, I will let you go. Have an awesome evening. I will see you tomorrow.
All right, you too. Bye.